Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today is April 26th, 2024, and let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? So I want to do a map update today, so I'm going to be focused on the main front lines, and let's start with the positive and then we'll go into the negative stuff. So the positive update is in Bakhmut. So surprisingly, the Ukrainians were able to regain some ground between Klishivka and Ivanivske, which is south of Bakhmut. And you guys know that in this sector, for the Ukrainians, it's very difficult. The Russians have been putting a lot of pressure. Putin gave them the 1 millionth command already of taking, or deadline, I should say. Another deadline set by Putin that they need to take the city of Chasiv Yar by May 9th. So that is their Victory Day parade. And Putin wants to have another win that he can showcase to the Russians. So we know that the Russians have been putting a lot of pressure here, and what is mostly difficult for the Ukrainians is the fact that the Russians are flying freely in the area of Bakhmut with their Su-25s, their Su-34s, and other jet fighters, and dropping very destructive bombs, including the FAB-500, 1000, 1500. So it's a very difficult situation for the Ukrainians because it appears that they don't have the man pads and the air defenses which would allow them to destroy these Russian planes. So it is absolutely critical that Ukraine receives that US military assistance that's already been approved. Thank God, it's already on the way to Ukraine. $1 billion was already approved and sent out to Ukraine a few days ago. So I think they really need to prioritize bringing some of these air defense systems and man pads such as Stingers, etc., Starstreakers perhaps from Britain, to start striking these Russian planes that feel very free right now. They understand that the Ukrainians don't have the weapons and the ammunition, so they can continue on pushing or trying to push in this sector. And the advantage for the Russians right now in terms of shells is 10-1. So that really tells you how difficult it is for the Ukrainians. So it's very pleasant to see that the Ukrainians have been successful in doing an operation where they can regain some ground in the area of Bakhmut, whereas because it is saturated with Russians right now, as they're prioritizing this sector to push further into Chasiv Yar. So that's the good news. On a less good note, first of all, not that it's really important, I don't think this is going to change anything, but north of basically Bakhmut, so in the Kharkiv and Luhansk area, close to Kupiansk, the Russians got a little bit of ground close to the village of Kislivka. Very negligible. It's not really meaningful. They just got a little bit closer to this village, but in the grand scheme of things, this entire front hasn't really moved that much. So I don't really foresee the Russians to be that successful here, and I don't think they're really prioritizing. It's just one of their bluffs where, yeah, they're going to be pushing, they're going to try to have some gains here, but where they're really concentrating right now is Bakhmut and Avdiivka. So speaking of Avdiivka as well, there is one very important development here, which is obviously very negative for the Ukrainians, and I've talked about it yesterday on YouTube community, is Ocheretine. So this is where the Russians managed to have a small breakthrough, but still important enough for us to notice it. So that is north of Avdiivka and Stepove. If you guys recall, the last few months before the Russians took Avdiivka, there was a lot of fighting ongoing in the village of Stepove. The Russians kind of had Krasnohorivka here. They were constantly trying to storm through this railway line, and you can see that following the fall of Avdiivka and the Russians capturing Stepove, the fighting went into Berdichi, and the Russians also continue on pushing along this railway line that heads into Ocheretine. So what happened here for them to be partially successful in this sector is the fact that the 47th Brigade was rotated, but it was a poor rotation, and the 115th Brigade, if I recall correctly, was poorly equipped to be able to rotate and, essentially take back these the positions, the Ukraine positions. So the Russians, noticing that a lot of Ukraine positions were left essentially with no defenses, there was nobody present. They found an opportunity to do an offensive here. So you can see that last 2 weeks, they essentially gained about 7 kilometers, about, 5 to 7 kilometers worth of gains for the Russians. So very meaningful, because we know how the Russians usually advance at a very slow pace, but here in a matter of 2 weeks, 5 to 7 kilometers is pretty important. So unfortunately, in this entire sector that is north of Avdiivka, that goes into Pokrovsk and also other more important cities like Konstantinivka, it will get worse before it gets better for the Ukrainians, because we know that it will take some time for the Ukrainians to rearm, receive those weapons that the United States approved. So it's going to take some time for the Ukrainians to delegate and prioritize the sectors and delegate the resources appropriately. So that is an unfortunate update, but it is the way it is. The Ukrainians have faced a lot of adversity, and I think that this is just one setback. In the grand scheme of things, once Ukraine is rearmed, it will manage to stabilize the line here, especially around Avdiivka and Bakhmut, and it will set the stage perhaps in 2025 for an offensive. And where you may say this offensive could be, and I think the smartest decision would be to double down and do an offensive in the south again to cut this land bridge, this Russian land bridge that was created between Rostov and Crimea. Why? Because it's a huge blow for the Russians, as the Ukrainians will certainly destroy the Kerch bridge, and by cutting this land bridge and destroying the Kerch bridge itself, the Russians will be essentially, they will start starving out from resources. The Russians won't be able to transport it by cargo ship because, well, the Ukrainians dominate right now the Black Sea with their sea drones, and they also, even if they could move with air shipments, it simply isn't enough to feed millions of people and troops in the south. So for the Russians, it's going to be a very, very bad, embarrassing, but also critical situation if the Ukrainians are successful in 2025 in cutting this land bridge and also destroying the Kerch bridge. It will be a big blow for Putin, because the eastern sector, let's face it, is very well fortified by the Russians. It's porous. At the end of the day, the Russians can freely move their logistics, their supplies from Russia to Luhansk and Donetsk. It's a plain open border. And so for the last decade, the Russians have been building very effective logistics. That's why in the Donetsk area, around Avdiivka, in the center of Donetsk, in Krasnohorivka, Novomikhailivka, they've been pretty good at pushing slowly but surely. It's because Donetsk is a very large city with millions of people. The Grand Donetsk area, you can see the amount of railway lines that are available for the Russians to move their supplies. So this is a very efficient staging area for the Russians. That's why they're having more success, because of course with the fact that the Ukrainians don't have the ammunition as of right now necessary to defend themselves, it's allowing the Russians a window of opportunity to continue pushing before the Ukrainians are going to be capable of stabilizing the line. So this front line is difficult, and I can only hope that within the summer the Ukrainians are going to have the air defenses, air defense systems, the shells, the ammunition, the Bradleys as well, the armored vehicles, to stabilize the eastern front line in Donbass. So that is the update for today in terms of the map. Again, in the south, the Russians are continuing their small little offensives in Robotine and also in Staromayorske. So far, there haven't been any changes, so that's positive as well, that the Ukrainians are capable of holding the line here in the south, which will be important for them for an eventual possible offensive in 2025. You guys can let me know what you think about this strategy. Should Ukraine double down in the south, perhaps in 2025, once they manage to stabilize the Russian offensive and stop it to a certain degree? Because for sure, this Russian offensive cannot keep going for forever. It will culminate at a certain point. And I think the culmination point is when the Ukrainians are going to have enough weapons to stop them and really do a lot of damage, especially the ATACMS. Forgot to mention the ATACMS, which will be crucial to destroy the Russian military airfields and bases, and especially the airfields, because we know that, again, when we're talking about Bakhmut, the Russians are flying their jet fighters freely right now. So striking these airfields, destroying and damaging dozens of jet fighters, helicopters, is going to be critical for the Ukrainians to regain that air superiority that is necessary for the Ukrainians to win over with the F-16s. Now, of course, Ukraine isn't going to receive like 100 F-16s, but even a few dozen of them will make a difference in certain areas. So the Ukrainians, I think, will have to prioritize striking airfields and military bases in occupied territories in Ukraine, and also railway hubs, areas like Debaltseve, which was very crucial for the Russians back in 2015 when they captured Debaltseve. There's a lot of railway hubs right now that the Ukrainians need to destroy, which will make life more difficult for the Russians in Donbass right now to push. So you guys can let me know about this strategy here by doubling down with another summer offensive in the Zaporizhia, Donetsk area in the south. One last thing I want to mention before I end this video, and that is related to some news that have been circulating, indicating that the Kremlin is on pretty shaky grounds right now, and Putin is, again, extremely paranoid. So a person very close to Shoigu, Timur Ivanov, so he's a minister, part of the Ministry of Defense, led by Shoigu, which is a friend, apparently, of Putin, but he was arrested by the FSB and Putin in the last few days on charges and grounds of bribery and corruption. I'm not surprised. This is ongoing everywhere within the Kremlin, but it's pretty important because he's a pretty high figure and a friend of Shoigu. And so it clearly indicates that Putin is extremely paranoid right now. And I think that there might be some lack of trust between Putin and Shoigu. They were portrayed as very good allies and friends. Even at a certain point, I remember Shoigu and Putin would spend time together hunting. That's how close they were. And now Putin is cracking down on Shoigu's friends. They're clearly involved in these corruption schemes, which is not really surprising. That's part of how a kleptocracy works, which Russia is a kleptocracy and a regime and a dictatorship. But for sure, there's a lot of things brewing up within the Kremlin. And my point being about the situation of Timur Ivanov being arrested, certainly he will be charged. And he will be, put in jail, or if not killed. But it indicates that the Kremlin is becoming very, very shaky right now. And I think that the Ukrainians need to exploit this by trying to sow divisions, buy out, and continue spreading this infighting within the Kremlin, buying out certain people within the Kremlin, and to help with this division within the Kremlin. Because as I've said in the past, I think Ukraine's best shot right now at regaining all of its territory is through a massive Russian collapse. If the Kremlin collapses completely, the institutions fall, and this is the best shot for Ukraine to regain specifically Donbass. Because otherwise, through military means, I think it's virtually impossible at this point for the Ukrainians to muster enough forces to regain Donbass. It's just not possible. The Russians are too well fortified here. Their logistics are well set up, but if the regime collapses, that's the best chance Ukraine has at really regaining Donbass entirely. The south of Ukraine is easier for the Ukrainians and more logical because the Russians, if they have to retreat, they can't retreat after the Sea of Azov. They're completely blocked. So by losing the Kerch Bridge, losing this connection, this vital connection between Rostov and Crimea, that's it for them, for the Russians located in Kherson and parts of Zaporizhia. So that's why this Berdyansk-Mariupol push will be very important in the next year or two for the Ukrainians. If all things get together so that the conditions allow the Ukrainians to do such a push, of course, because it's all based on the consistency and the help from Ukrainian allies. So that's the video for today, guys. I know I talked a lot. I hope you enjoyed this update on the map, the recent changes. Let me know what you guys think about, what should be the Ukraine strategy for 2025. And again, a huge thank you for your support. I really am super grateful for all of you. I read your comments. I like them. I respond to them, and I really genuinely enjoy your feedback. So if you enjoy my content, please subscribe to my channel, like my videos, leave me a comment, and I will see you guys in the next one. Slava Ukraini!